So I just got finished reading World War Z for the 5th or 6th time in as many months, and I think it's safe to say that it's now my favorite book, which is weird because I don't particularly like zombies. I don't like them as a horror trope because I don't like horror. I don't like being scared. But World War Z, the book, I'm not talking about the movie, the book isn't a horror story. The framing device for the book is that the author, who I'm going to call him Max Brooks, he's the real life author and the interviewer. He's going around interviewing people about the zombie outbreak 12 years after the fact. So there's not very much suspense. Are the monsters going to come, or jump scares, or anything like that. And I also don't like zombies as a writing trope because they're just so overdone. They have been done to death and back and death and back to the point where we gotta move on to skeletons because there is no more meat left on these reanimated bones.
Lisa, look out! A skeleton!
And people who try to do zombies and try to do anything new with them anymore, they tend to go for the nihilistic, humans are the real monsters after all, which I hate. Look, I've worked in retail, I know that, but I'm reading as an escape. I don't want to be reminded of it in my stories. But World War Z doesn't do that. It has bastards in the story, but it also has a lot of goodness. There's this one interview from a guy in India who's talking about how he tried to escape the zombies by fleeing into the ocean and walking for 3 days to a shipping yard. And when he gets there, he's one of hundreds of people who have had the same idea. So everything's crowded, people are trying to pull boats into the water, other boats are trying to cast off, people are swimming and getting pulled down under by zombies under the water. And he talks about how some boats only allow young women or people with money, or it's in India, people of certain castes on their boats.
We needed a bigger boat.
The interviewee makes a point of saying that those are the exceptions, not the rule.
But rules have exceptions.
He points out how none of those boats even need to be there. They all could have set sail, gone deeper into the ocean away from the zombie threat by now, but they haven't. They're all sticking behind to try and save people. And the interview actually ends with the guy explaining how he tried to swim out to the boats, but because he was exhausted and there were zombies in the water, he fell under the surface and started to drown, and a complete stranger reached down and pulled him up onto a boat.
You can't swim!
And I really like that. I like that it's not just a group of people helping their own. It's strangers helping strangers, and it's the system that's failing as much as people being passive. And it's a nice breath of fresh air.
I need a break.
I also really liked how they handled the zombies. They weren't particularly fast or intelligent or a hive mind or any of the new stuff people try to do with zombies. They were the normal, slow-moving, groaning, mindless creatures. And it was people not taking that seriously that ended up hurting a lot of people. Okay, I guess I should probably talk about things I didn't like. And I will put a disclaimer that this book is an Outbreak book written in 2006. It's intense to read in the year 2024 now.
Plagues! Plagues!
Honestly, it gets a lot of stuff right about how an international outbreak would work, about what systems would fail, and that's scary. If you don't want to read about that kind of stuff, this is not the book for you. But it can also be entertaining, saying, yeah, you got that right, you got that right, you got that wrong. It can be a good intense, or it can be way too much, depending on the day.
I need a break.
With that said, I do have mixed feelings about the representation in the book. It actually had disabled representation, which I don't see that often, and I feel like they handled it really well. There were two main disabled characters. There's a Japanese man who is basically a modern-day samurai. He talks about how he went off into the wilderness trying not to be a burden on anyone when the outbreak started. And when the rest of Japan had to flee, he stayed behind and ended up killing a bunch of zombies and helped defend the homeland.
You are a samurai.
And it was really good. His story is what the movie should have been about. And the other main disabled character was a man in a wheelchair who he wanted to join their neighborhood watch, which was go around to all the houses at night and make sure that everyone's accounted for, make sure no homes had zombies in them. And how at first I didn't want to let him join the neighborhood watch, but he pushed back and they let him join, and he ended up doing his job really well. The book also did really interesting stuff with the mental aspect of the outbreak. There are 4 big things that it did. The first is Quislings, which are people who could not deal with the stress of zombies existing, so they broke down and thought they were zombies, and that caused a lot of problems when people got bitten and then didn't turn into zombies, and people thought there must be a miracle cure. The second is near the end, when things are starting to get better, the people who literally laid down and died. There are several interviews dedicated towards how they tried to fight that.
I want to just lie down and die.
The third is all the children who got left behind in the chaos. One of the interviews is of this, I want to say, keep wanting to call her a little girl. She's my age in the interview. Her name is Shannon, and she got left behind when she was 4. And now they're interviewing a grown woman who's still mentally 4. And there's all of these children who are left behind who are now feral, who cause all sorts of trouble when they're trying to take back the US, because you have these feral, now adults, fighting with the soldiers that they don't want to kill the children that were left behind.
Wild human! Wild human!
And the last really cool thing they do is kind of like split personalities, the stress getting to you so you compartmentalize. There's 2 interviews where they kind of make that happen. There's a man who comes up with, in the book they call it the South African Plan, which is basically, we can't save everyone, who do we save? And the man who came up with that plan can't deal with the fact that he made the plan, he decided who to save. So he got split personalities, and the person that is interviewed in the story is no longer the man who made the plan. He is a different person. And there's also a woman who gets dropped in the middle of Mississippi, the swamps of southern United States, and she has to walk and try to get to help. And this whole time a little voice through her walkie-talkie is guiding her, giving her tips and advice, even though all the psych people are pretty adamant that that little voice was never a real person. And it was just all so cool to read.
Including that little voice in your head.
One thing that made me prickle was the lack of representation for women. So the people interviewed were primarily world leaders and soldiers, so it makes sense that it was primarily men, because that's who primarily fills those roles.
We're men, manly men!
But the author says in the first chapter that this is a book about the human element, about the voices of millions of people, or people that have been silenced due to the outbreak. So it was kind of weird listening, because I listened to this book.
This is about the headphones?
Listening for over an hour and not hearing a female voice, and only having 6 of 40 interviews be of women, having less than a quarter of the interviews be there to represent half the population.
You go, girl.
But overall, World War Z was a really good book. It's not at all like the movie. The zombies are different, the framing is different, the characters are different. There is no Brad Pitt main character in the book. There's the interviewer, but he barely shows up.
Both of my parents failed to show up.
It's just really nice if you want to read zombie media, but you don't want to experience horror. And if you want to see many different sides of what a zombie outbreak would be if you're trying to write zombies. So yeah, everyone should go read World War Z.